Everybody is that way. Well, I'm not going to rearrange.
You're not going to do now. Okay. Well, how about Indian style, or I'm sorry, what is it called? Crisscross applesauce.
Yeah. Do we need to take? I don't know. Whatever. Let's just get started. Welcome to the New York Secret Podcast Meetup thing. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
We're streaming live on Facebook. There's questions, I'm sure, that we won't be able to see, but we'll get them answered later. We're going to do like a wrap-up thing. Thank you. We have Ben and Andy with us.
George, your drink is covered in the camera.
Oh, well, who cares?
There's Andy.
Yeah.
I look at it as a Japanese.
Andy's drinking. We have photographer extraordinaire and TV show star, Ben Asen and Andy Abrams. So Andy, what's it like being Josh Gates' co-host? You've been on the show 3 times now.
And I think you recently co-hosted one of his meetups.
Yes, yeah. You were featured in a meetup. That's very nice.
Yeah, last week, Josh came to Morristown. He did a show. If any of you ever get a chance, it's actually a very fun show. It goes through his experience, how he tells he was an archaeology and a drama major, and what do you do with that? So I guess you host a show like Expedition Unknown. But the most fun part of the show was, as he's going through everything, he gets to the end, he comes to a question and answer period, and during the question and answers, people are asking the most fascinating questions because this guy's been all over the world. So the first question is, what does it smell like to open a sarcophagus in the pyramids of Giza after 2,000 years? And he answers. Somebody else goes, what's something you looked for, a monster, or goes, that you didn't want to find? And he's going, oh. And so he stops the questions and answers, and he said, all right, listen, I know what you really want to talk about. He said, how many people have a question about The Secret? And I mean, hands in the air like crazy. And I couldn't believe it because of all the things that he does and all the shows that he does. There's such a fascination, which I'm sure comes from the idea that most people will never climb the Himalayas to look for a Yeti or dive in Scotland to look for the Loch Ness Monster, but you have a chance. You have an equal chance to find a treasure in New York or St. Augustine. So he said he gets about 50 emails a day. Most people have either solved or think they've solved. And he loves talking about it. So we did. He called my name out, and I got to stand up. He surprised me, and we did about 8 or 9 minutes. My wife must have posted it on Facebook because I'm not on social media. But it was a great laugh. It was a lot of fun. And he does love this. He said again, I remember him backstage, and he said, of all the things he's done, he gets more questions about this and there's more enthusiasm about this than anything else that he's participated in. And just in case anybody's wondering, he's working on a solve. He said at this point, he's not planning on doing another show because everything's sort of wrapped up very neatly. However, disclaimer, that's not to say if somebody does find one, he wouldn't jump at the chance to do another episode. So it's out there, so don't give up because he's still as fascinated with it as everybody else is.
We forgot the most important part of the meetup. Hang on.
Oh, we need the light.
There we go.
There we go. We have the
light.
light. You can't really see the blue light. We're at the blue light. Ben.
Much better. That's much better.
So Ben, I have to ask. You guys did this book 40 years ago. You put out this book when I was
40 years ago?
It's more than that. You put out this book when I was like 8 months old.
I was only 9.
Did you think that after 40 years you'd have random people meeting in a bar in Midtown Manhattan just to talk?
Absolutely not.
Have you got another book that people meet up in?
I mean, I still can't believe this.
It's crazy, right?
It's crazy. I mean, about a year and a half ago when John Michaels contacted me, I was running home to do your podcast one night, and I came into my building, and I was running to the elevator, and my neighbor was there. He said, why are you running so fast? I said, I'm going to be on a podcast about this book that I did 38 years ago, maybe 38 years ago, called The Secret. He goes, The Secret? He said, my 2 daughters, who are like 11 and 9, are looking for the treasure. I said, wait a minute. This is a book that I did in 1982 that I forgot about in 1983. Okay? I mean, it was basically a job that I did for Byron. Byron and I were really good friends. We knew each other since we were kids. But I can't believe it. I still can't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you people are all crazy.
We are. There's no question about it.
But it's a good crazy.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a good, yeah. I think Byron, looking down at us right now, is saying, fantastic. Great. I really do.
Do you have anything?
Well, I was going to ask that question. You stole that from me, but that's
I'm
okay.
sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's what I do.
So the question everybody has is, where are the casks? No, I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
could you let us know?
That was a joke. So,
Was it really?
kind of. So, Andy, this morning you shared your story about you and Brian finding the cask. Can you share that with everybody?
Sure, I think it's probably well documented, and thank you to these guys, because I watch their podcasts, and sometimes I get lucky enough to be on them, and my wife will walk in and go, seriously, you're doing another podcast? And
It's crazy to me that Andy Abrams is like, I watched the podcast,
oh
and these guys are
no, you're so knowledgeable, and it's so much fun, and you get these great questions, and I love it, and so most of the stuff is known, but I'm always trying to come up with different things to tell people. It's 2004, and I remember we had been looking, and I remember we were in Atlantic City, and Brian pulls out a picture. We're in a bar in Atlantic City in the Borgata. He pulls out a picture of the Cleveland pillars in the wall. And they had made the connection at that point. It was a crazy thing because somebody put it through the internet and it didn't come up, and then all of a sudden, Johan, I think, it came up with a match with the names on the wall. And as soon as he showed me the picture, I was spellbound, because when you have an aha moment in life, you never forget that aha. It's like falling in love for the first time. And I said, oh my God, like, if this is really there, it's really there. And things went very quickly from there, because that was in April of 2004, and within a month, and we probably would have done it quicker, we decided to go out. We went out the weekend of Mother's Day, and I was telling you guys earlier, he had a backup friend just in case I couldn't make it, because it was Mother's Day, and I had 2 little kids, and I wasn't really sure my wife was going to be super keen on me going treasure hunting that weekend. So I said, can I go? And I think things happen for a reason, particularly in this genre, right? You have to get lucky, because when we went out, I was very fortunate that he chose me to do this work with him back in 2002 and 3 and 4. I met some fantastic people who I used to read about on Quest for Treasure, and their ideas were extraordinary. And I'm like, I'm in the presence of such smart people, and so I said I'd go. Had I not gone, he had a backup, and the other guy might have gone with him, and they might have gone out there. You know, when we got there, and I got to tell some nice people this afternoon about it. You know, when we walked in and made our way through the Italian garden and saw the lion's head and the fountain, you know, chills, goosebumps. We're like, oh my God, right? And the arch, and then the big cup that was in front of the center, oh my God. And then we worked our way to the Greek garden, and it's great because the road curved that way, so naturally we brought us in, parked the car, got out, saw the pillars and the wall, and just had a heart attack. Like, that's it. Like, when you do your searching, it's great. When you do your research, it's great. But when you get boots on the ground and you see something, and it gives you those goosebumps, and you stand someplace and go, he was here, right? And he gave Ben dolls to take pictures of it, and it's this spot. I'm sorry if I'm talking too long. But, you know, we walk down, and there's this huge rectangular plot, bigger than this room. And we see the wall, and if you walk down, the names are on the wall the way it says the secret podcast is facing us. As we go, there's a rectangular plot, it must be right here. So we're starting to figure out how to do this, and they start setting up these chairs, these white chairs. And we had a drop dead time, we had to leave to get home for Mother's Day. And we said to the guy, what are the chairs? And he said, there's a wedding this morning. And we said, why? And he said, a wedding. And we said, oh God, where? He said, right here. And now we knew we were not going to be able, we'd driven, I don't know, 10 hours or more, 12 hours. We had 3 hours of sleep, and we were not going to be able to dig on this side of the wall. And the more chairs they set up, we then went around the back, and that's when we realized, okay, you could walk up 2, 3 floors to 7th step up, you can jump, and it made it much easier to visualize. But the whole time we're digging, there's this couple that remembers that day for a very different reason, because they were married, and the entire time we're there, we're trying to be quiet, because when you look at pictures of the wall, there are not cutouts, but there are sort of windows without panes that see through to the other side, and I'm sure at any time we could have jumped in and kind of photobombed the wedding pictures, but they're getting married, and people kept walking around to us, and we're trying to be quiet, we're excited, right? And they're like, what's going on? And we're like, we're digging for buried treasure. And more people would come, man, look at these guys, right? And we got through the entire ceremony, the entire whatever reception, they're gone. They probably did their entire honeymoon by the time we hit the bottom. But somebody, somewhere, got married while we were finding this. So it was an amazing experience. And I said to these guys this morning, for all the research you do and all the solves that you come up with, right? You still have to get a little bit lucky. You really do, because it's that proverbial needle in the haystack. We dug to a certain point and hit rock bottom. And I mean, that was literal and figuratively rock bottom. When you get to the bottom, you don't find it. You go from here and the adrenaline to here, like maybe it doesn't exist. And to know that it was, you know, if I'm here, it was where Bradley's sitting. And we could have easily left Cleveland and not found it, and we would have probably posted somewhere in Quest for Treasure, dug to the bottom, nothing here, which means probably nobody would have gone back, because why waste your time? We did it, and you were this close, and no one would have found it. And I don't know if there would have been a surge, because I know after we posted the pictures and we made the find, there was this renewed sort of, oh my God, they found one. Like some regular guys found a treasure, and we were like little kids who found buried treasure, and there were 10 more out there. And so go, find it, do what you can. And I think that created a new buzz and a new round of excitement. And I'm sorry, Ben, that's what brought you back into this whole thing.
That's okay.
But it's been great. And so that day changed a lot for Brian and me.
Ben, so earlier, Andy and I were talking about it, and he mentioned how he videotaped the find. And he's like, you know, it's not like now where you can just take a phone out of your pocket, videotape it.
Right.
And just, you know, world of technology changed from then and now, you know, from 1982, especially from then and now, in photography and film. Can you talk to us about the project and how professionally you were a photographer then, and kind of how that has evolved now?
So I would say so once Byron signed me to do this book, because we were very, 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 very good friends. He was probably like one of my best friends. And he called me up and I said, Byron, I'm going to Washington, D.C. this weekend. He says, you're going to Washington, D.C.? He said, you got to take this sculpture, which is the left wing and the right wing eagle. You got to take it and you got to shoot it in front of the Capitol building. Now, could you imagine doing that in 2021? I would have been arrested. I would have been in jail right now with Rudy Giuliani. So I went down there with my wife and went to visit some friends in Arlington, Virginia, actually. And I took the seagull, the sculpture, I took it in a shopping bag on the airplane, because in those days there were no metal detectors. You just took anything you want to take on the airplane. You could have taken a gun, actually, probably, and they wouldn't have done anything.
What is that, sir? It's a
So I put this eagle on this wall around the Capitol, and I photographed it, and then I took it to the steps, photographed it. Nobody said a thing. One or two people came up and said, what is it? I said, it's for a book project I'm working on, which I thought was going to be a total failure. And I would go to Florida to visit my father. You're going to Florida? You got to take a picture of the real estate, this Robert Morley character in drag. You're going to San Francisco? You got to take the frog out to San Francisco and photograph the frog. This is what really it was about. I didn't know what this book was about. I never knew what this book was about.
That's amazing.
I get emails, I got an email last week. Do you know do you think the treasure is buried in Prospect Park? I said, I have no idea. Byron's wife had no idea. I speak to Sandy all the time. This was just a book project that I thought I got paid for, and it would go away, and would never come back. Well, I guess I was wrong. I'm wrong a lot, actually. That's all I could tell you.
But it's so interesting to me that these were these great friends, right? Between you and Byron and John G. Palancar, and there was the chance that he could have shared this with you. He could have shared it with John Jude. He could have shared it with the different writers. And after the fact, I mean, as tragic as everything was, and passing away so early, and again, timing-wise, thank God. I think how lucky and fortunate and blessed we were that we found him while he was still alive, because he got a huge kick out of when we came in that day and met him. You know, it was like, you did what? You found what? And he was taking pictures, and it was fun. But if he had shared that, oh my God, the pressure on you right now, the pressure on John Judah, come on, tell us, do you know that? And they really don't know. Like, he kept everybody in the dark for their part, right?
Right.
But he didn't share, so you never really got to know.
But I have to tell you, Byron and I would spend a lot of time taking our kids. Now, his daughters, one of his daughters is around the same age as my younger son. We would drive out. He said, Ben, let's go to Coney Island. We went to Coney Island several times together, okay? And I really have not followed the treasure at all, but he loved Coney Island. Now, I don't want you all to run out of here with shovels and go to Coney Island, but I got to tell you, Coney Island was very dear to him. It really was. And we spent a lot of times with our kids. And our wives never went, by the way. It was just the two fathers, the two daughters, the two sons, and we would drive out to Coney Island. And I'm not saying there's anything buried there. I mean, I get calls and emails. Ben, it's got to be Prospect Park. It has to be Prospect Park. I don't have any idea. I really don't know.
Well, with you not knowing, with everybody sort of being kept out of the loop, did you even know about the Japanese translation?
I didn't know a thing about it. Not a thing about it. No.
So,
No.
I have an idea in my head that you, that Byron, that Joellen, that John G. Palancar, that John Perard, everybody that was involved were just the best of friends. Was it a giant group of friends, or was Byron like the middle spoke?
Byron was the middle spoke. Joellen and I got very friendly. In fact, I spoke to her like maybe 3 hours ago today. John, I met once. John Perard, I know because he works at Lincoln Center Film, where my son works as a manager. But we really didn't know each other. We had a meeting with Ted Mann and Sean Kelly, who wrote for National Lampoon. And I went to this meeting. They talked for 2 hours, and I got to tell you, I don't know what the hell they talked about. I was like, okay, it's a job. I want to get paid, get it done, and it's over. This is really strange for me, I got to tell you. It's just, it makes absolutely no sense. I'm glad you're all involved. It's better than watching a football game, isn't it really?
Yeah,
seriously.
absolutely.
Because your team is going to lose every week. So, at least my team's losing, that's for
Our
sure.
team also loses every
Yeah, every week. So,
there's no difference.
You know what, we were walking from breakfast this morning over, and we walked past some hotel, and there's this plaque on the wall, right? And
Right.
we see it, and we stop. And you have to stop and read it. This is the Benjamin so-and-so, because every detail in life means something. Like, who is this? And it doesn't always have to relate to the home, but it makes you stop and appreciate everything around you. This morning I'm driving in from New Jersey. I'm driving past Roosevelt Island. And I remember when that was a big obsession of mine. And there's so much traffic, it's great because I actually can look at Roosevelt Island and take in certain parts. Dickens wrote about that, and I remember where the insane asylum was, and I'm looking at it, and I almost ran into the car in front of me, but, everything has more meaning, and you stop and you look at things differently because it's important to pause and to appreciate the details. in life, and it's an amazing thing, because before this, I would have walked past that block and wouldn't even thought twice. So it does make you use your time in a way that's more meaningful.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So
Definitely makes you appreciate the parts of your city that are generally unknown. Like I love that I know more about my city, the things that most tourists or most locals don't know about my city,
Right.
and I appreciate those things. I love that. It makes you appreciate the little things.
George, I'm 54 years old. Until we found the Cleveland treasure, I had never been to Ellis Island. I had never been to the Statue of Liberty, right? For all the friends who come to
Really?
town, I had never been. Like, you grew up here and you kind of took it for granted. I'd always seen it. I work in Jersey City, for God's sake. I see Lady Liberty with the, but I'd never been there. And then I remember after we found Cleveland, Brian and I one day said, let's play hooky from work. And I don't know how we got out of it. We took off and we went over and took the ferry over to Ellis Island.
Right.
And then we took the ferry over to the Statue of Liberty, and I stood underneath it and just marveled at it. And it's so strange to me that, but for this, maybe I never would have gone. And it was right in my own backyard. So even the things we take for granted, right? Because of this, it gives us reason to invest the time and the interest.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience. I was in North Carolina for 20 years, and part of the public education there, they teach you about the lost colony, about Roanoke Island. It's something you learn, and it's something, and the Wright Brothers Memorial, First in Flight, and you take that for granted. I'd never taken a trip to the Outer Banks. I've been to the beach plenty of times, but never specifically to the Outer Banks to see those historical sites. But because of this hunt that you guys put together, it gave me a motivation to go out and explore these places I've never been, and just really appreciate the history of the areas that are around me. And that's branched out to San Francisco, to St. Augustine. Now I'm here in New York learning about the history of New York. We took a cruise that kind of circled the island, and there's so much I had no idea about that I would never have learned if I wouldn't have come up here for this meetup. Anybody in the audience, raise your hand if you have learned something about the city that you live in that you would never have known if it wasn't for the hunt. There it is. So thank you so much.
But it also distorts things a little, because I remember when I was on vacation in North Carolina years ago. My kids were much younger. It had to be 10 years ago. And we're standing at the Wright Brothers Monument. And it's fantastic. I'm trying to explain this is where the first plane flew. We're at Kitty Hawk, right?
Right.
And I walk up and I see by dauntless and unconquerable determination. And to me, I'm like, oh, God, right? By dauntless and incomparable determination. And I'm explaining to my kids, that's the line from The Secret. He stood right here. And so like, it's kind of cool that they flew the first plane. But there's also this other cool thing here that took place, and my kids were like, oh yeah, flight's interesting, but the treasure hunt, right? So it gives it more layers to the onion, and it gives you more things to look at that, it makes everything that much more interesting.
So do you think that when the Wright brothers flew their first plane, they ever think there would be frequent flyer miles?
Or that they would be upstaged by a book written in 1980.
Right, exactly.
But let me ask you this, the last one more question, and then we'll just open it up to everybody else. I talked to a bunch of Byron's friends, especially William Stout. I don't know if you know William Stout.
Sure.
He told me, and basically everybody that I've spoken to that's known Byron, that to them, this is the last thing Byron would do. William said that Byron just wasn't adventurous, and to picture him in his three-piece suit,
Absolutely.
New York guy, go into a park somewhere in the middle of some city, digging a hole and burying his treasure. It was not like him at all.
Absolutely right. It was not Byron at all.
So what do you think the motivation behind this was?
I cannot begin to tell you. Byron, what I remember most about Byron as a friend, especially once we had kids, he would never come to my house without a comic book for my kids. Never. He taught kids in Philly, when he was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, he set up a nonprofit to teach kids in the ghettos how to read. And he taught them how to read with comic books, because his philosophy was, I don't care what they read, as long as they read. I don't care if it's a comic book, if it's To Kill a Mockingbird. I want kids to read, and he got my younger son especially. My son is such a reader now, and I owe it all to Byron.
And see, when I was at that show last week with Josh Gates, a young man stood up in the audience, 13 years old, his name is Frank, and he was explaining how he had solved Charleston, I'm sure of it, and he got a 14, 15-page sort of manifesto to him to read, and it was adorable, it's great, but I wound up talking to him after the show, and he said, I've been home during the pandemic, and I didn't have a lot to do, and the kids are feeling so much anxiety, and there's so much going on, and he got hooked on The Secret, and he was reading and researching and using the time in a positive, productive way, and came up with this entire solve, and I looked at him and I go, what a good kid you are, and what a fascinating thing that you did, because, instead of retreating into himself, or he used the time productively. Now with the internet, he was able to research all kinds of things, and he came up with an entirely plausible and great solve. So, 13 years old, and I just said to him, I hope you find it. I hope you get the feeling, the exhilaration of shovel to ground and that clink, right? Because you worked hard, and if you don't, that's okay too, because the journey is probably the best part. But it was so interesting to me that he was a kid who's 13, and look what he did because of this simple book, right? This probably got him through a time that was really otherwise very difficult for him.
Yeah, for every empty hole, to me, it's a marker of a time spent with a friend or an adventure out in the world. So, as many empty holes as I can dig, I'm down for it.
That's great.
Ben, if you can talk to us a little bit, we have some photographers in the community. If you can talk to us about the process and how that worked back in 1982, from taking a photo and then all the way to having that printed in a book.
Okay, so I had 2 cameras, which film obviously in those days. I had one Nikon with black and white film, and one with 35mm slide film. And anything I shot was shot black and white and with 35mm slides. Unfortunately, Bantam cut the budget, and obviously the illustrations were going to be in Technicolor, and I got put mostly in black and white. And but I shot everything in color, everything in black and white, and I tried to shoot pretty. I tried to make everything exactly the same. It was a little difficult. I didn't use a tripod. I've never been into tripods. I like just holding the camera and taking the picture. But I was able to do it. Problem is that when I gave all the artwork to Bantam, and unfortunately, when I got most of the stuff back, I got all the black and white pictures, all the negatives. Well, I had the negatives. I gave them black and white prints. Unfortunately, most of the color I never got back. Byron was never able to explain it. He felt awful about it. It sort of got lost. I do have some of the color, which is outstanding. I wish it was all in color, but unfortunately, that's the way it is in book publishing. My pictures were not as important as the illustrations were. And I understood that. And so I have some of the slides. I'm considering possibly putting some of the pictures on my website to sell. I'm not quite sure yet what I'm going to do.
Would any of you want to buy those? Yes. So, there's a little bit of interest there.
There's some interest. Okay.
Let them know what your website is.
I kind of feel badly that a lot of the stuff is lost. I know I don't have it. I have about maybe 25 to 30 slides. Some really good ones, but unfortunately some of the really good ones I don't have. I don't think Bantam stole them or anything like that. I just think Byron was very disorganized in his life when it comes to things like that. It could be somewhere, I have no idea. But that could be another book, looking for the slides, I don't know. But I do have some of them, and I'm hoping to have them up on my website maybe in a month or two, which is shopart.benasen.com. I'll probably do a limited edition. I'm discussing that with Byron's wife, Sandy, now. And part of the proceeds of that will go to a charity that Byron was very, very dear to. I can't think of the name of the charity, but it had to do with reading for kids. Byron was so into helping kids read, especially kids that came from one-parent families that never could buy a book, and Byron thought that was awful. He was so into having kids read. Reading he thought was the most important thing in anybody's life. So we'll do that probably in the next few months, I'm hoping.
And that website again?
Is shopart.benasen.com.
If you go to that website, you can sign up for Ben's newsletter as well.
That's right. And you get 20% off your first order. Thank you.
No, absolutely. He has such fabulous work there. You really need to check that out. Secret or not, you need to check out his work. It's amazing.
I lied. I said I had no more questions, but I have one. So if you don't mind. There's a lot of people in the community that dig into super fine details in this book. And one thing that comes up a lot is how much input Byron had in different things. How much input did Byron have in your photographs? Because I'll lead into that saying that people have found the fence where you took the photo of the I forget her name. She's got a tower on her head. People have found that fence. People have found the corner.
That's actually in Kendall, Florida.
Yep.
That is north of Miami. I have a lot of family in Miami. My son went to the University of Miami. And I was actually going to a barbecue place to have ribs, and we had the sculpture with us. And my uncle said, "Go to Kendall. Kendall's this new area of Florida. It's going to be they're going to be building tons of houses there. There's all this empty property there." And we went. It was actually called Shorty's Ribs. And if you're ever in Miami, you got to go to Shorty's Ribs, because I got to tell you, the best ribs I've ever had in my entire life. And I've been going there since I'm 7 years old, because my family, I have a lot of family that raised their family in Miami. But so we went there and we shot it in front of this fence and we shot the sculpture in Kendall. Kendall was like just farmland. It was chickens and hens and ducks and eggs, and now it's all condominiums and houses. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But so Byron didn't give me a lot of help. He just said, you go to San Francisco, take the frog with you with a saxophone and shoot it somewhere. Shoot one picture in front of Tower Records. I had never heard of Tower Records. Tower Records was a big record store in LA and San Francisco. They finally moved to Greenwich Village, and they're long gone. By the way, LPs are not sold that much anymore. It's mostly on Spotify now. But so I shot that in front of Tower Records. I shot a picture of a vintage car with the Elvis Presley sculpture in front of a fender of a vintage car. He didn't give me a lot of help. He just said, you're going to Washington, you're going to Florida, you're going to San Francisco, take the sculptures with you. I always took them in a shopping bag. Nobody ever looked at the shopping bag. I just took it to San Francisco and shot it and came up with a couple ideas. My wife would help me. My wife's legs, by the way, are in a picture in front of Brooks Brothers.
That's right.
We needed a woman. So she was pretty young then, very young then. And she's in the picture. I have a couple of my kids are in some of the pictures. But he didn't give me a lot of help. He really didn't. He said, just go. Whatever you think is good, do it. And that's what I did.
That seems to be a lot of the...
So if I can just give him a plug. I just saw some of the color pictures for the first time. And for those who... The only thing I can liken it to is The Wizard of Oz, right? When you start in black and white and then she lands in Oz and you see Technicolor for the first time in 1939, right?
Right.
They're so extraordinary, and I imagine if Bantam had made the smarter decision and gone with the color prints,
Let me see if I can show that right there. You want to hold that up, Andy, maybe?
It's unbelievable, and it's not going to do it justice, right? But they're incredible, and I think more time would have been spent by people looking at the rest of the book and finding meaning in these pictures because the artistry and the colors are just crazy beautiful.
This is the Boogeyman in San Francisco. So somebody from the Facebook page actually drove to San Francisco. There was a sign in one of the other pictures that had the name of the street, and they figured out exactly what house this was filmed in on a back porch of my friend Bill's house in San Francisco in 1982. There was no GPS, there was no Google Maps, there was no Waze, and they figured it out where this was photographed.
They went to his house, right?
What's that? They went to his house, but he's not there because he got divorced. His wife got the house, so he's not there anymore.
Thanks for that, searchers, by the way.
Right.
Showing up to these guys.
But I mean, if you're a fan of this, like the artistry, it wasn't just the making of the casks.
Oh, yeah.
Joel and was
And there's another one. There's another one.
Oh,
Monty
and I'm
Irvin.
sorry. I have.
Where's Monty Irvin?
Nice.
Big reveal.
So this is Monty Irvin.
Yes.
If you don't know, Monty Irvin was the first black baseball player signed with the Giants.
But didn't he play for the New York Giants?
He played for the New York
How'd
Giants.
you get him to put on the San Francisco Giants?
Well, Byron went out and bought a jersey.
That's what I was going to ask.
We went to Byron's apartment on East 63rd Street off between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. And I said, are you paying him? No, I'm buying him a pastrami sandwich at P.J. Bernstein's Delicatessen, which was on 3rd Avenue. Monty was great. Monty was the second black player signed in Major League Baseball. Wow. First it was Jackie Robinson, and then it was Monty Irvin, and then I believe came a guy named Willie Mays, if you know who Willie Mays is. And Monty worked for Major League Baseball. He was in management there, and he agreed to do it for nothing, just for a pastrami sandwich. So,
awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure pro athletes would do that today.
yeah, right. They would, that's very true. It's called playing baseball, not working.
Right.
So, I mean,
Right.
I wonder what we could get out of Palicar with a strong sandwich.
what's that?
I wonder what we could get out of Palicar with
No,
a strong
Palicar with like a fatty melt. That's not
Right, exactly.
So I was saying that the amount of artistry, right? Like you appreciate the verses and you appreciate the illustrations are gorgeous, just gorgeous, and you could look at them. And for those who have the reproductions, they're great. We have some of the original copies. I have an original book here, and I got to talk to some really nice people earlier, Max and a couple others, and they looked at, oh my God, like you can't believe what the original books look like. They're incredible. Also makes the job that you're doing so much harder, and I respect it so much more because it's easier, I think, when you have the original, as opposed to reproductions, because there's a lot more clarity. But then you look at the photography and the artistry that went into that, and you look at what Joellen made, and I brought with me today, if anybody wants to see.
Oh, look at this.
This is
Oh,
my
God.
piece of the cast from Cleveland.
God.
It's in this little sort of hockey puck thing. I'll hold it up here. The nice part of this is after we found the cask and it had been broken over time, Brian gave me a piece. This is the only piece that had retained its color. I think over the many, many years, the box had collapsed under the weight of time, and it was caked over with dirt, and a lot of it had oxidized and turned white. This one piece, again, I don't know if I can get it, was the inside of the lid and had the color to it, and I was very drawn to it. And he was sweet enough to give it to me, and again, some of you may have heard this before, but has a really wonderful plaque on it that says, May 8th, 2004, the secret good friends are more difficult to find than buried treasure. And I think that goes for everybody here today, because whether we're just meeting you for the first time, or you got these guys who are just killing it with this podcast, we're all friends because of a mutual interest. And this is a bit of what that history is. And so whether you were photographing it, and the stories behind every picture are unbelievable. I could sit with him and listen to his stories, every picture, right? Or the cast and how they were made. There was so much love and artistry and expertise that went into this. I'm not surprised people are still talking about it after 40 years. I'm just surprised only 3 have been found. And I'm sure that somebody asked me earlier, Will any not be found? Yeah, I think that probably some will. I imagine, somebody said to me today, which ones do you not think will be found? I fear New Orleans may have been lost because of the hurricanes.
Yeah.
No one could predict the natural disasters and the flooding,
Sure.
right? But I'm sure that another 3, 4, 5, 6 will be found, and it'll come because of sharing in communities like this. There's a collective find to it. So I sort of dislike, it's my theory, I think when one is found, it's a find for everybody. And again, it becomes another remembrance and testament to the other person who we all lost, which was Byron. And he created a legacy that keeps us looking and keeps us happy. And it's an important thing that we're all still doing. So cheers to all of you for showing the interest. It's been a great 20 years for me since finding it, and I'm still looking. And I think all of you and your lives are richer for your journey. So my toast to all of you.
Yes.
And I'm sure all of this stuff will be out for everybody to check out later. Also, one other thing that didn't come, it was at Byron's meetup, was the plexiglass box. There's 2 long-term, very, very revered hunters that most people don't know. Their names Nadine and Kim. They came today. Years and years and years ago, they went back to Brian and Andy's spot, back way before Expedition Unknown, because they knew that Brian and Andy's cast was broken, and that Brian didn't have all the pieces, and they wanted it. So they dug around, and they didn't find any of the cast, but they found the plexiglass. The plexiglass for these casts are very, very unique. The easiest way to figure out if somebody, there's a lot of fakes, right? There's a lot of people who pop up and say, I dug this up. And they generally have plexiglass. The easiest way to tell if something's a fake is because the plexiglass is pretty easy.
Right.
They have a piece of plexiglass. It's in a bag. They're not going to break it out because it's still kind of dirty. But they've agreed to let people check that out too, just so you can see. It's just different.
So, speaking of friends found in the hunt, one of our dear friends and co-host, Brett, could not be here today. He is watching live.
Oh, nice.
So, hey, Brett, we miss you. Just wanted to say that.
Enough to come.
Oh.
He was just like, I don't like you guys.
No.
I don't want you.
But this is kind of cool, just because you mentioned it, I'm sorry. Like, this is the first time I got to meet these guys live. First time I got to meet Ben live. When I went on the podcast with him, I was such a fan, because his stories were so fantastic. Like, I couldn't get enough of it, right? And these guys, their work, I'll pop it on, I'll be looking at it, my wife's like, really, you're watching another podcast? I go, it's always something new, and it's always something interesting. But the ladies here, I was reading their posts on Quest for Treasure 20 years ago. And I marveled 20 years ago. Oh my God! Yeah, they do. Like it was so. They were at the forefront of this stuff. Before everybody was so internet crazy, and they were writing things and figuring things out. When we hadn't matched locations with verses, when we were trying to figure out which gemstone went with which month, and I got to meet them today for the first time, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're on TV." I go, "Who cares?" Oh my God, you're the people who used to read your posts 20 years ago, and I don't want to autograph your book, I want you to autograph mine. That's how influential and inspirational they were. And the thing I find about this hunt is as nice, if not nicer, than inspirational as I found them to be, right? Everybody is just a good person, and when they bring this. So I'm so glad you came into town. I told you earlier today, that was one of the highlights of coming today, was to get a chance to meet both of you. So really, forefront treasure hunters
Can't
right here.
emphasize that enough. A lot of people who came in after Expedition Unknown idolized Ryan and Andy. The people who were in Quest for Treasure idolized people like Nadine and Kim.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be where I am today without Nadine and Kim.
Yeah.
Nadine and Kim, they took a break from the treasure hunt for a couple of years. They were the people I sought. I wanted their approval. I wanted their research. They were. They're just they're everyone's favorite treasure hunters.
They are.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies.
Yes.
Oh, shucks. You guys are the best.
You guys,
I wasn't listening. What were you guys saying? so we'll open it. Does anybody have any questions for Ben or for Amy?
Raise your hand if you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Tim, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you, Mr. Ben, you were saying that we're taking the
most of the photos for the dolls are fair photos.
We call them soft sculptures. That's what Joe Ellen liked to call them, soft sculptures.
Soft sculptures.
Right.
And somebody noticed that most of them were taken along Broadway.
Along where?
Broadway. A lot of the locations that the book references in the acknowledgement section were taken along Broadway.
Not that many, really. Really?
I believe so. I think there's like 6 or 8 of them
Okay.
that were taken along
Okay.
that way.
Okay.
Was there a particular reason why you chose those locations? Like, was Mr. Preiss like directing you towards a specific?
No, I've always been a Broadway fan, so I mean, Broadway is New York, so.
Didn't you say once the only real location in New York he absolutely had to have was the photo on the steps because it mimicked a newspaper?
Yes,
article?
yeah, there was some newspaper article.
Yeah.
Wait, are you talking about yes, you're talking about the
small
one,
business.
the small businessman. That actually was not a businessman, that was a lawyer.
Yeah. And
He was a famous
Right.
malpractice attorney. I can't think of the guy's name now, but there was a picture of this guy on the steps of
courthouse.
60 Center Street.
Yes.
And I actually saw the photograph, and we took this old man sculpture with the attaché case,
Right.
walking down the steps. I said, I'm going to do it exactly the way. It might have been the Daily News or the Post, I can't remember. And I just recreated that photograph
Yeah.
with a soft sculpture. His name was Tillis or something, I can't remember, but he was a very famous malpractice attorney.
Yeah, it's a great shot.
Yeah,
It's a
thank
great
you.
job.
It was a lot of fun doing that. Those are the same steps, by the way, that Sam Waterston and from Law and Order, you know, he used to walk down those steps on Law and Order, so.
That's right.
There are a lot of interesting like pop culture references that happened like around 1982. But what is that demarcation point that we should be looking at as whether the book was published or locked in, where it couldn't be edited anymore once you actually printed it?
And so for our listeners at home, we're just going to repeat the question so people can hear it. There were a lot of pop culture references, and what was the demarcation where it was past the point where the book is being edited and being produced, but they would not have been able to be included? Is that correct?
Yeah, like, what was like a book actually?
What was the
locked in?
timeline?
And so just to follow up on that, in one of your photos you took at a newsstand, there was a doll sitting on some magazines. You were
Right.
able to
And
trace-
is Cheryl Teagues in that photograph?
I don't remember.
On People Magazine? I think it's
It
like
was,
cover
it was
of
people,
People
it was
Magazine.
something like that. But we were able to trace that to like April of the year it was printed. It was just a few months before
The
that
book came
was
out.
printed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a picture that we had to redo or something, if I remember correctly. And Byron and I went to a newsstand, and we asked the guy who was a newsstand, can we shoot this soft sculpture? He said, yeah, sure, go ahead. You know, nobody ever said no to me when I did. I mean, it's incredible. Now, everybody would be so superstitious and so suspicious of what you were doing. In those days, taking the right wing and the left wing eagle, which is pretty interesting considering what's going on politically now, that Byron had this idea about a left wing and a right wing. Nobody ever asked any questions. We would just go, take the sculpture. Can we shoot this here? Sure, go ahead, shoot it, go ahead, yeah, sure. Because nobody ever thought it was important.
When, see how to phrase this. How long before publishing when was it basically wrapped up? Like for reshoot,
It was,
putting aside
okay,
reshoot.
so I shot most of it actually in 1981,
Okay.
okay? But a few pictures got done into early 82. I remember going to my sister-in-law's place in LA with my wife, and we shot a Tower Records thing there. Then we shot a Tower Records thing in San Francisco because we went up to visit my friend Bill, is where we shot The Frog, which is the boogeyman, playing the saxophone, which was great. I love that soft sculpture. It's a great soft sculpture. It's really. Jo Ellen is so talented. She used to show her work on Madison Avenue. I don't know if anyone knows the actor Jim Dale, who was in Barnum on Broadway. Jim's wife owned a gallery on Madison Avenue, and Jo Ellen sold a lot of her soft sculptures in that art gallery, and sold for a lot of money.
Really famous clients, like I think Robin Williams bought it.
Robin Williams
So
bought a couple of her soft sculptures. Yeah.
We bought one of them
Yeah, I know.
Bird.
What's that?
We bought a Robin Williams sculpture.
Oh, you bought a Robin Williams sculpture?
One of Joe
No
Ellen's
kidding.
sculptures that were in Robin Williams' estate.
Jo Ellen is so talented. She just underestimates her creativity. She's amazing, absolutely amazing.
She's very talented, very kind.
Very, very talented, extremely talented.
Yes.
So, I'm curious about what are some of the areas that Byron, I guess, like frequent or hang out. I mean, a lot of people think about Prospect Park as possible.
Do you have any hints, Ben?
Well, we did love Prospect Park. It was only about maybe a mile from where we lived on Glenwood Road in Brooklyn. So Byron lived. I moved to the street where Byron lived when I was about 14 or 15. So Byron and my brother Michael were in school together. They were about 3-4 years younger than I was, and they were friendly. I was not that friendly with Byron as a young kid. We became friendly as adults because our fathers were friendly. And I think my father might have said to Byron's father, hey, you know, Ben's a photographer. Oh, Ben's a photographer. I got to give him a call. And I didn't work in this. I worked on other books before The Secret. I worked on a Beach Boy book, which is Byron's favorite group of all time. If anyone doesn't know that, the Beach Boys were like that was his group, the Beach Boys. Going back to the question, Prospect Park, definitely Coney Island. We spent a lot of time at a place called Marty's, which was a luncheonette that made the best chocolate malteds in the world for 35 cents in the day. And there was Ed and Rudy's. Ed and Rudy's was on Coney Island Avenue. It was a candy store, and we bought all our comic books there. Byron was a Superman freak, action comic books. He bought them all. I think Byron actually owned the first or second copy of the Action Comics, which is where they introduced a guy named Superman, if I'm not mistaken. I was not as smart as he was. That's all I can tell you. I mean,
What about like the office? So like where did he work out of primarily?
he worked out of an office. Well, it's funny. When I first got friendly with Byron again, he sublet an office on 57th or 58th Street from an attorney. And this attorney had a duplex office. And he had a fire pole, George. And this guy was probably in his 60s. He would go from one floor to another, sliding down the fire. I don't think Byron ever did that. I never did it, that's for sure. And then in the early 80s, Byron took an office on 25th Street in the Flatiron District between 5th and 6th Avenue. And that's where his office was for many, many years. In fact, that was his only other office, was there.
So a lot of the stories that we hear are second, third, fourth hand. And one story that we'd love to hear from Brian and Andy is about Byron's actual office and the aesthetic of the office. And could you talk about it, and then can you lend any credence to why it was decorated in such a fashion?
So my memory of it was, and I remember we drove in. It took after we found it, we called him the next week, and there was this excitement, and then there was the needing to set a date that we could all get together, and it took a few weeks, I remember. But when we finally got in, we got to the office, and we got out of the elevator, and my memory is the whole sort of room there was silver. It was like, and it looked like something out of Willy Wonka. It was very odd, and you couldn't tell where the door was or where somebody was going to come from. And I remember one sort of door moved open, and he came out in his very cool blazer and cool shirt, and it was very wacky and hip and not what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be just sort of a normal office. And he had, I remember Brian saying he had sort of I don't want to say a mad scientist. You described him as being sort of eccentric, or right, but I remember walking and going, where are we and where's the fizzy lifting drink? This is an odd feeling. So
he wasn't eccentric, he was disorganized.
Disorganized, definitely.
His desk, I cannot begin to tell you what his desk was like. it was like just piles and piles of papers and books and contracts and agreements with different artists and authors. And I mean, he would, I did a job for him for the Beach Boys, and I gave him 4 8x10 photographs for the book. Couldn't find them. I go to his apartment the day we're photographing Monty Irving, and he's taking a shower in his apartment. And I'm sitting at his desk. I'm like looking like, what is this crap here, you know? I found the 4 8x10 photographs that he said he lost, and I had to reprint them again. I said, Byron, they're right here. Oh, yeah, right, okay. That's just the way he was. You know, a lot of brilliant people, not that organized.
Well, and he told us, and this is right from his mouth, he told us when we went in that day, you know, we went to a bank to go to a safe deposit box so that he could retrieve the gemstone for Brian. And we said to him, oh my God, he's rummaging through, and we hear him go, oh, there's the ruby, and he's all excited. He was right on the other side of the cubicle going through them. And he said, oh, we felt like, oh my God, the solution's right there. And he said, no. He said, I think I have the solutions. They're folded up, and they're probably in one of the pockets of one of my suits in my closet at home. So it wasn't even like it was in a folder, you know, called the secret solutions where you could go and retrieve it. He just thought he had them in a pocket, in a suit, hanging in his closet. And so, you know, we said, and I tell the story, when he passed away, it turned out I had a friend who, my college roommate's wife, worked with Byron's wife for years. We never made the connection. Yeah, Sandy, and my friend Wendy worked with her. And we were talking one day, and I said, oh my God, she said, I'm going to pay respects tonight at this Shiva call for someone who just died. I said, oh, who died? And she said, a friend of mine, her husband, he was in the publishing industry. And I said, who? And I knew Byron had died. And she said, oh, Sandy Mendelson, his husband was Byron. And I said, Preiss? And she said, yeah. How'd you know that? And I said, that's the guy who wrote the book that I went on that treasure hunt. And it was just such an odd connection. So this is an awful story, but Brian.
It is.
Brian, no. So Brian calls me, and I tell this to Brian, and Brian goes, wait, you're friends with, you know, he makes the connection. He goes, you got to go to that Shiva call. And I go, what? He goes, you got to go. And I said, no. He goes, go with your friend Wendy as like her date. And I go, I'm absolutely not crashing a Shiva call. That's awful. So he said, but Andy, remember what he told us? It's probably in one of his suit pockets. And he said, so what you got to do is, you're probably there, I'm sure, right? So he said, you got to get in, and you got to kind of get to his closet. And Brian will deny this. He's going to go and kind of see if he can reach his. And he goes, think of the alternatives. You know, his spouse is probably going to clear out his closet, and it'll all go to Goodwill. And someday there's going to be a man, a homeless person walking down the street in a really nice suit with the solutions to all of these puzzles. And he goes, and I said, and I remember there was a moment where I'm like, should I? And I said, oh God, absolutely not. So we never went, but I do remember him telling us, I have the solutions, they're probably folded up in a pocket, hanging in my walk-in closet.
And aside of that, there was sort of a mythical story. Nobody knows where it started, but I know I heard it before I heard that story from you. That one time Sandy was going through Byron's clothes, found a list of cities in a pocket.
So that is one of the second, third, fourth, fifth person stories that we've heard.
Yeah. I don't know where that started.
Yeah.
Who else has questions?
Yes.
So you might know that. Do you know why he picked the cities that he picked?
You're asking me a question that I've been asked probably 1,000 times. I don't have a clue.
There was no method.
No. He never, we never, you have to understand something. I finished this project and I never thought about it again until like 2.5 years ago.
Well, let me ask you this then. During the John Michaels podcast, there was something that everybody picked. John Michaels does a Christmas special every year.
Right.
And you were on it this past year, and you said something that John sort of glossed over, but people have focused on a lot. You said Byron was very interested in the Civil War.
He was.
Would you like to expand on that?
No,
As we all run off to Gettysburg.
Byron did a history book for kids that was sort of like 250 pages. It was the entire history of America. And like, I forgot the title of the book. In fact, I have a copy of it at home. It's a great book. It really is a great book.
Jimmy knows. Jimmy's like, I've got it in my library.
Yeah, and what's it called? You know the name?
It's called Asen History.
That's right. And he covered the entire history of America like in 250 pages.
Amazon is blowing up
The
right
Civil
now.
War was just something that he was interested in, but I was interested in the Civil War too. So I can't tell you why, really. I mean, I really can't. I really can't. I wish I could have an answer for you,
Well,
but
so the reason I asked is because a lot of people, but even way before you said that, tied a lot of solutions to Civil War sites and Civil War stories, especially monuments. Places like Charleston where they're coming down.
right. And Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, he was really into Teddy Roosevelt. I think he was disappointed that he didn't do one of the really big there's some great Teddy Roosevelt biographies. You probably know, Andy. I've read them, and I think he wishes he had been involved in a Teddy Roosevelt biography.
And there's a Teddy Roosevelt soft sculpture, right?
There is, in the book, yes.
And I remember for the longest time, you go through waves of excitement. I remember at Hymn of Hard Word, and I remember one day probably talking to somebody or in the shower, like thinking and going, ooh, Teddy Roosevelt, Rough Riders, Hard Word, and I became obsessed with this idea it had to do Teddy Roosevelt. And we looked in Brooklyn, and near Coney Island, there was a park that had some plaque or something about Teddy Roosevelt. You had photographed a picture of one of the soft sculptures in
That's
front
right.
of the Teddy Roosevelt
That's right. Yeah.
memorial or mansion
Yeah.
where he was, and
Right.
all this stuff made so much sense. Even when you say that, I get some goosebumps, and I'm like, well, let me check my book for a second. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
And speaking of Jo Ellen Trilling's work, she doesn't only do soft sculptures, she does a variety of art. And you can check her out at joellentrilling.com and see all of her work there as well. No, it's just there to see her work. It's not for sale, but it's just to see her work. It's amazing. And it's a lot of different mediums. joellentrilling.com.
She's very talented.
Incredible.
Extremely talented.
And she does a lot of work with cats, which if anybody that watches the podcast knows, I absolutely adore. So,
Yes.
So, I have a question. In the podcast interview with Mr. Alan Carr, he makes mention of random info dumps that Byron had given him that he was burning in his, whatever, in his apartment. To your knowledge, were any photographs you took connected to those info dumps?
No. I have no knowledge of that at all.
Yeah,
really.
Jo Ellen used to say the same thing. She said that when she was creating the sculptures, she would get manila folders with mythical figures,
Right.
like mythical beasts, like their history and their description and stuff.
Right.
And she was supposed to incorporate that. But it sounds like you just hands off completely with the images.
Hands off. Most of the projects I did with Byron were pretty hands off. He thought I could just come up with the great ideas. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't come up with the best ideas.
Yeah.
Most publishers, I worked with a lot of publishers over the years. I did a book called Dare to be Dull, which is about the dull person's, and everything in that book was lined out for me exactly what I had to photograph. Byron did not do that. He just left it up to me.
Well, I mean, and that kind of goes with what John Palancar said in the past too. He said that I believe Byron saw the images that he was painting once.
Right.
Before they were finished, and he only saw a couple.
Yeah.
He said he would get a little bit of information from Byron and he would put it in the paintings, but it's not like now where you can snap a picture of it and text it over to Byron. and say,
Exactly.
Is this okay?
Exactly.
The paintings were basically done.
I mean, I'm thinking that if I had shot this book now, and Byron was alive, I'd be emailing him pictures. All right, Byron, is this the right way you want it? You know, which in some ways I'm glad I didn't have to do that because it would have been like just a lot harder to do. I knew exactly what he wanted. He told me, I want a picture of the Eagles in front of the Capitol.
Yeah, there's not
not that difficult to do, really.
And so a lot of people go back to the genesis of the book, and did it relate to the book The Masquerade that was popular in England, and it was one treasure, but it was a very expensive treasure, and I think there was a period where that was popular, right? That people were into it. And I remember Brian sort of fixated on 1976. There's so many things that relate to 1976, and at the Smithsonian that they did and this is all speculation, means zero, nothing, but that there was an exhibit at the Smithsonian in 76 that was popularizing this book that had come out abroad, was it Abroad in America? Abroad in America, and there were a number of authors who were bits and pieces of their work, and as it came to light, so many of the authors were then referenced in one way or another in The Secret. And I remember ordering a copy of The Broad American. Oh my God, so much of it is just so dull. But I read through so much of it, thinking, I wonder if there's something in here. And we've long thought, in terms of the genesis of this, he's probably just a young man who had literary interests. Obviously, maybe went down to Washington, D.C. and saw this incredible exhibit at the Smithsonian in 76, and all these different authors, and Dickens and Melville and Sarmiento, and said, I want to do something that's fun, right? Since comic books, that relates to what was popular, this treasure hunt. And he took all of this and created a project that maybe wasn't necessarily his comfort zone. But I remember when we met with him and asked him, and he said, I used to take my fold-up shovel and I threw it in my backpack, and I'd get on a plane and I'd go to a place and I'd unfold the shovel and dig it and put it and done. And so I think that there were probably seeds, or there was a genesis in that time period, that in maybe 76 or so, and again, total speculation, but that ties to seeing this great testament to all of these literary geniuses and their perspectives on America, and then tied it to immigration, and created something that made people want to go out and look at national parks and look at things that they might not have looked at. So I feel like Ryan was on track there, and that there's probably a lot that came from that in terms of the genesis.
But let me tell you something. What Byron loved doing, I remember going a lot with my kids and his daughters to the Brooklyn Museum. He would love if he was in a room with 50 adults and there were 4 kids, trust me, he'd be with the 4 kids. He really would. He loved getting feedback from kids. He loved teaching kids. He loved talking about reading and books with kids. And that's something that I'll always remember about Byron. He really, really, really loved doing that.
Yeah. And then in a way, doesn't this kind of all come full circle to make all of us feel like big kids? Because I remember saying to my wife, at 40 years old, I was digging for buried treasure. At 40 years old, when we're little and we're outside and we're digging for, or pretending to find buried treasure, that's what we all want to do. Mm-hmm. You're 9, 10 years old, and to be able to revisit that, or revisit with our kids, or our families, or just do it, is something that brings out the little kid in all of us. And the hope that you could find something, and that there are treasures buried that you might find. I think that touches on that, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, this gives us all the opportunity to be the Goonies.
Right. That's a scary mom, right?
Yeah.
Who were some of your early photography influences?
What are some of my early
photography influences?
Before I started working with Byron? I'm going to tell you something. I went to college for business finance because my father told me that's what I should do. And I took photography in my senior year of college when the Vietnam War was on, and I had a low lottery number. And the minute I put the paper into the developer and the image came up, I said, that's it. This is what I'm going to do for a living. I loved going out and just shooting black and white on the street. That was my big thing. Right now, I do more urban art. I do a lot of pictures of New York City water towers and anything. I love fire escapes, because fire escapes are going away, because there are no more fire escapes anymore. Now buildings are fireproof. But I love just shooting people, doing portraits. Byron had me do a couple of author shots, and then I was able to hook up with other book publishers and do a lot of author shots. Thanks to Byron, I got to photograph one of the greatest science fiction writers in the world, Isaac Asimov. Spent a whole day with him in his apartment and found out that he went to high school with my uncle. And Asimov, Asen, they were next to each other in their yearbook. And I never even knew that. I called my uncle up and said, "You never told me you went to high school with Isaac Asimov." He said, "You never asked." So, I mean, to me, photography is a way to explore New York and explore the world. This is probably the only day that I don't have a camera with me. I usually have a camera with me. An iPhone is not a camera, by the way. In spite of what you say.
But I am, before you leave, you're going to give you my phone and make you take a picture.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So you can have an
Asen. So backstory, Ben loves water towers, and I was in Chicago. And if you're standing at the burial site where Rob dug up his cast, you look, there's a building with this giant, gorgeous, mirrored water tower. And I was like, I'm going to take a little artsy picture of Ben, so I got behind some branches.
Right.
And I shot a picture and I sent it to him, and he's like, that's not.
You call this photography? Come on.
Yeah. It's like, I got Instagram, my camera phone, and I'm pro now. So.
Nice try.
What other questions do we have?
Anything else? Yes.
I was wondering, do you know if he was much of a fan, that Byron was much of a fan of like Tolkien or Lord of the Rings or anything like that? Seems to be kind of a...
I have to say I'm not sure, but I would think he would have been. It's nothing that ever came up in any of our talks or anything, but I know, I could tell you this. When the second Star Wars movie came out, he calls me up and says, "So my sons are Ivan and Harrison, his daughters are Blair and Kara." I don't think Blair went. He says, "There's a 10 o'clock a.m. show, the opening day of Star Wars. We're going." So we went to a coffee shop, we had our breakfast, we stood in line and went to see Star Wars.
1977?
What's that?
When it opened up?
It might have been, no, it couldn't have been 77. It might have been the second round of Star Wars, because it was probably like...
77, 1980, and then 1983 was Return of the Jedi.
Right. 80 was Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, that's like
And I only remember that, which has nothing to do with this, but I only remember that because my very best friend went Friday night to see The Empire Strikes Back, and we were so excited we had tickets Saturday morning. Right. And I remember my friend Ed, in case you're watching this podcast, Ed called me and said, "Oh my God, I got to see Empire Strikes Back." And I said, "Oh my God, that's great." He goes, "You're not going to believe it, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father." And I remember going, "Wait, you just ruined the entire thing for me before I saw it." So, Luke, I am your father. That was good. That was good.
That's not the actual line.
Yeah, I am your father.
I am your father.
Luke, I am your father.
Yeah, he never says Luke. I think he just says, "I am your father." Sorry,
I was gonna say, who's scared of Star Wars?
So, Andy,
I think there was one other question. I'm sorry.
yeah, maybe you excuse yourself for a moment.
We'll wait for that.
Wait for Matt? Okay.
The 10 stone, so
Yes.
was it definitely the 10 stones at the bottom? Because I saw your video, 12treasures.com.
Yes.
Thank you for the
Was it ones on the bottom, or was it the ones on the top?
No,
I
if
saw
you-
you counting. and
If you
went
can,
again.
yeah, I mean, if you stood there, like the bricks on the wall right here,
Yes.
some were thin,
Yes.
some were big, right?
The thin ones at the top.
But if you counted from the top to what hit the dirt, there were 10. So it
10 down?
Yeah,
Not 10
it was 10.
over, 10 down.
Correct. Yes, thank you.
So I just want to clarify.
No, absolutely. It was, and we were so happy because
Yeah.
we
I
got
just
the
saw you
six
counting the
six
whole
steps, and the planter. We're like, "Oh, 7th you can hop."
Yeah.
And I remember we did it, but then we got up there, and I'm like, "Oh, please be 10 down," right? So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10 was at the dirt level. So that's how we knew it was 10.
Okay, just wanted to get that from you again.
absolutely.
So piggybacking off of that, I made a Cleveland video where I made a joke that Andy was just bored and poking around, and he yelled at me. And he clarified. There was logic behind where he dug, and if you wouldn't mind explaining that.
Yeah, I said to George this morning, I'm sorry if I came off like...
No, don't. It was worth it. People should yell at me, it's fine.
No, you know what, I think that when we started this a long time ago, I remember Brian went on to Quest for Treasure, and he had Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes as his avatar, and I love Calvin and Hobbes, right? And so I went on as Hobbes, because I was sort of like his imaginary friend. Right, well, yeah, and I wanted to be, and he used the name Siskel, and, he used Egbert, so I used Siskel, so they're all kind of inside little stuff. So, of course, so we, when we were there, you know, I think it was maybe just a perception that I was kind of either along for the ride. I mean, this was his baby. He was looking since he went to UPenn in 1980, and then he stopped. And then he found the book in his attic years later, and he started again, and then he got me involved, and we did it for a few years together. So I don't pretend to have been in since 1980, but it is helpful, clearly, to have an extra pair of eyes. So on that particular day, we were done. We had done everything we thought was right. Counted down, counted over, were where we were supposed to be. Remember, the names were, as I'm looking at, the names were on this side of the wall. Yeah. We're now behind the wall, right? So as we're behind the wall, we come up, we dug to our spot, and we're done. And again, this is just perspective in life. I'm sitting on that planter, and we're exhausted, and we're looking at our watch, and we're going, we got to leave in 1 hour to get home for Mother's Day, and or our wives are going to be furious. And I'm looking at the road, which was Liberty Boulevard or Martin Luther King, you know, and I said to him, you know, Brian, the verse reads, as the road curves, beneath the countries as the road curves. And I said, we're in the Greek garden, Italian garden's right here, and the road curves this way, but you can only see it if you're facing this way. You know, the way we were counting it, our back was to the road. And it made sense because you had to hop up to get there. But I said, if we were looking through where the names were, and you're looking down at the road, again, it's not like I was a genius. It wasn't the theory of relativity, but I just said, if we were facing this direction, the count is different. It takes you, counting over brings you to, like we were here. And so doing it this way, the count brings you here, and then matching it up with 10 steps down. So instead of where, you know, we rarely be sitting, it's where George was sitting. And it was almost equidistant. But it was, and I remember counting it going, it's going to be outside the planter. It's going to be outside, it's not going to be an issue. And when I counted it, I said, oh, we're 3 feet inside or 2 feet inside the planter on the other side. I said to him, you know, maybe it'll be this way. But if I didn't sat on the planter in total despair, right? I don't know that the road would have been so obvious and that it was worth reconfiguring. So we did, and he, you know, it's absolutely true. He tossed me the poker and said, knock your socks off, and we were done, and I just started poking, and it's so ridiculous because how many of you have put poker to ground, right? How many of you put shovels to ground and dug, you know, and we could have, on one side, he literally mythologically dug to China, right? So we're on the other side, and it was as simple as that. It was 1, 2, and when we hit it, after spending 6 hours over here, and going 1, 2, like that, which I always joke, it's like the old Tootsie Roll commercial, 1, 2, right? And he didn't believe it. But I knew that the feeling was totally different than the roots we kept hitting all day, because there was nothing more for, you'd hit, oh my God, and then it's a root. So, and finding that plexiglass, which again they have a piece of, and pulling that out, and going, oh my God, I think there's something here. And within a very short period, about 25, 30 minutes later, digging by hand because we didn't want to break anything, unearthing this thing, and, you know, you reach into the ground and pull out a cast that was about this big, like this, and we got it out of the ground covered in dirt, and inside it were these pieces of the ceramic. It was so thrilling, and it was so, I mean, I wish every single person here has the experience of doing it. Again, the journey's great. Finding it like that was extraordinary. So, if you, again, you know, you got to get lucky. But as I said to George earlier, if I hadn't gone with him and we hadn't just kind of reconfigured it in that moment, I don't know that it gets found. So, am I the smartest man alive? No. But did I get lucky enough to be sitting in a person? Which is why for every theory you have, if you get a chance to get there and look it out, sort of like the boots on the ground aspect of it and finding some piece, because most of these things, there's going to be a confirmer on site. Has to be. And once you do it and you put it together, the rest was kind of history. So.
I want to thank you for documenting the other day.
Absolutely. You know what, that was one of the most fortuitous things because, it wasn't an iPhone, it wasn't an Android that we just, because now everybody, it was a little, we had the camera and I remember we bought it, which was so ridiculous that we actually thought we'd find it, right? When we bought it, what if? And I remember filming it all day for because people would be, I didn't know that anybody would be interested. But we had it and we had a writer from the Cleveland Plain Dealer who did a spectacular piece. He was fantastic. And we had a photographer. And the guy was taking pictures all day and I told him earlier today, after about 6 hours he left. His name was Martin and Martin just couldn't take it anymore. And Chris kept writing, no matter what it was. He caught our despair. He caught our high moments, every joke. And when we finally found the plexiglass and it was clear there was something, he got on the phone and said, Martin, get your ass back here. Like, you got to get back here. And Martin came running back and he took these pictures of us taking it out of the ground. And I got to tell you, it was like, it was pretty special. So I'm glad I have it because to the extent it inspires anybody, right? I mean, there was nothing fake about it. Like, we got it and we found it, and that needle in that proverbial haystack, right? If that's enough to inspire you to go out and dig 100 times because you made 99 holes, but as Bradley said, one more hole is worth it. That was the spot, and to see that and that feeling, oh man, it was amazing.
So you had an hour to hit the road to make Mother's Day.
Right.
Mother's Day once a month.
We did. We took his toothbrush, as I said recently, cleaned it off because we wanted to see it. They wound up taking a bunch of pictures. Here's something else that people don't know. So while we were digging, we had to get lunch because we were getting hungry, right? And so I left and I drove over to a pizza place to get a pizza.
Good.
And Brian, I guess we couldn't DoorDash back then, right? So I ran the Cultural Gardens. So Brian kept digging and I went. And at the pizza place, they had those gumball machines. You put a quarter in and you spin it and out comes some kind of silly prize. So we got a little plastic, like tube that came out, and there was this dollar sign, this blingy dollar sign on a black string. They came out and I go, oh, this is fantastic. So I took that back with me to the site, and while Brian was eating his slice of pizza, I dug down and I buried it in the spot. And Brian kept digging, and lo and behold, at some point, 20, 30 minutes later, he found this plastic, and he pulls it out, and it's this stupid thing from a gumball machine. So he pops it open, and he takes it, it's a dot. So if you look at any of the pictures from back then, he's actually wearing this black string necklace with this ridiculously pointy, bedazzled dollar sign on it. Because I said, look, if we don't find anything else, at least we'll maintain our sense of humor and sanity. So he's got that, right? So we cleaned it off, we looked, and I remember they're still writing like, guys, we gotta go. Because, finding the treasure was great, but being late for Mother's Day, nothing would have mattered. So we got on the road, we drove the whole way back. We kept joking and going, no, we're gonna make a movie about this someday. And I'm like, maybe we can get Tom Cruise. Like back then I had brown hair. I was probably 30 pounds lighter, was better looking. So we're like, oh, if we can't get him, we'll call Michael J. Fox. And who will play you? We're doing the whole who'll play George. We didn't know yet. So we stopped at a restaurant on the way back. We had just about 30 minutes to eat, and we were starving. And we were eating, and and Brian wasn't a very emotional guy, and Brian had this epiphany moment, right, where we're sitting there eating, and he got very sort of like, overcome. And I said, what's the matter? And he goes, and it hit him, it all hit him, right? And he goes, other than the birth of my kids and my marriage, he goes, this is the greatest thing I've ever, this is the greatest moment of my life. And it all kind of hit in that moment. We were 2 hours into the ride home, and it hit him and we enjoyed our dinner. That was the most I think I ever saw him emote. Right? He just didn't hit it. And we got home early, you know, in the morning early, and then we were making breakfast in bed, and so the wives got what they deserved, and we made it in time. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Just to illustrate how much Andy loves his son, he dug up the casket and had it buried back for Mother's Day. And he's here today and has to leave as soon as we're done because it's his daughter's birthday.
We only celebrate on holidays and birthdays, so yeah.
And he's wearing it in this picture.
Oh God, is he?
Yeah, he is.
Is it in the map? So Naomi can also have
Oh my goodness. He is.
He's totally right. Okay, so he really, I didn't make it up. It was, it was so ridiculous. But he's got it on, and this was the center page from the Cleveland Plain Deal. I'm sure everybody's seen it. It's such a great article. I wish all these years later we could reconnect with the author because he did such a good job. But there is this tiny, cheesy, ridiculous gumball machine that he's wearing that was going to be our treasure if we hadn't found the real treasure.
We're gonna have to ask him if he still has that.
Oh, I'm sure he does.
You wanna
I'm
see it?
sure. I hope he does.
Oh my God. The secret garden.
This is the Cleveland Plain Dealers newspaper.
Well, he did write, I'm sure Ben will answer that shortly, but he did write about Gershwin in a lot of books. He was asking if Ben was Byron was a big fan of George Gershwin.
He was a big fan, and as I was also. He just loved George Gershwin.
He wrote a book, Byron wrote a book called, not the Webster's Dictionary, where in the back it had a big story about like young life in Brooklyn. It had a story about Gershwin. He seemed to focus a lot on Gershwin.
And I remember I got to spend a day with his two daughters, Blair and Karen. They were lovely. And we were talking about things, because we're just trying to kind of piece together, right? You know? And they said he didn't even tell his kids. He didn't even tell his kids, like you think one day he'd been like, you know, say one time I was in San Francisco and I heard this story, like he never told his kids, and they don't really even know, but so they're piecing it together, and I don't remember if it was Blair or Kara said to me, oh, one of his favorite albums was Rhapsody in Blue. Like he used to play it, so that was a confirmer from somebody who lived with him, and so you take that for what it is. It makes sense in terms of the New York puzzle, but we all write what we live, and we all create what we know, and so that probably does play a part, certainly.
Okay, just a comment. So we mentioned about the Civil War, Byron loved the Civil War. So Herman Melville actually loved the Civil War as well. So I'm curious, was he a fan? Do you know if he was a fan of Herman Melville? And is anybody not a fan? Because he was a Moby Dick.
You know, he did something with Moby Dick.
Yes.
And I can't remember what it was, but yes, he was a fan of Herman Melville.
Because he was local TV.
In fact, we rented a house together in Sag Harbor. And I remember...
With Herman Melville?
Yeah, with Herman Melville, yeah. Herman never paid the rent, though. Byron and I and our wives, we rented our house for 2 summers in Sag Harbor together. And I remember we talked a lot about whaling, because Sag Harbor was at one time a big whaling area. And he was a big fan of Herman Melville, but I can't tell you anything else about it, really. You have to understand something. When you're a friend of someone and we talk about stuff, it's very different than when you're trying to analyze something about someone. Byron and I were just really good friends. And I never thought about, you know, different things that he was interested in, like the Civil War. We talked about the Civil War, but I never thought he would do a book about the Civil War. I do remember one thing, though. We both had a copy of the classic comic. Remember classic comics?
Oh my God.
On the Civil War. I remember we both had that, and we talked about the Civil War a lot. I remember going to the Brooklyn Museum. The Brooklyn Museum is a great museum. It's a fantastic museum. And they have a permanent collection on the Civil War. Because part of the Civil War was actually fought in Brooklyn. Yeah.
I just thought the oddity because he wrote about Lincoln being shot over his right shoulder basically in his head. So it's odd that Chicago was actually
Over his shoulder.
when Herman Melville wrote. Really interesting.
That is interesting.
And you know,
Lots of War writers too.
and you know, early on back in 2005, 2006, after we had found the Cleveland, and we were looking around, and after we did Liberty Island and Ellis Island, we were kind of scouring the southern tip, right?
Yeah.
And I remember walking around with Brian, and we got to, was it Chaucer's Tavern or something, and there's the plaque outside talking about the West Indies native, and we're walking down Pearl Street, and all of a sudden, there's this plaque, and it's just ridiculous.
On
But
what
there's-
street?
Pearl Street. I think
That
it's
was
six
his
foot-
mother's name was Pearl, by the way.
Oh, really?
Byron's
Yeah.
mother's name was Pearl.
Oh.
So, okay. And there's
Okay.
this plaque up that says birthplace of Herman Melville. Now, I grew up in New Jersey. I read Melville in high school. Like, I
You never knew it,
that
huh?
he was born. Right? And we're looking at the sign, and again, I never would have stopped. I would just kept going. So I'm stopping again. I'm going, why is this here? Right here. And he wrote Moby Dick, and when it was first done, it was The Whale in 3 volumes. And that fed into that. And I'm like, did he walk this street? Did he stop because of prose? Because his mother's name was Una? I just found that out, right? So, but there's this plaque that probably 99% of the world walks past, and yet one of the greatest authors, right, has a plaque along Manhattan that designates where he was born. And the only reason I stopped to look at it was because you can't walk past anything and not pay it respect to it.
That's right.
I thought the coolest thing is that everyone thinks that inspiration is masquerading, right? So Herman Melville wrote The Confidence Man, his masquerade. So I'm wondering if he took this challenge 12-fold versus 1 for Kate Williams.
Oh. Interesting.
That's my theory.
Are you familiar with
Get out
masquerade?
there if you want to talk to me. That is my theory. His
Interesting theory.
masquerade,
Yeah.
Confidence Man, C, masquerade, mask, cats. And
Interesting.
then the founding was right, the misspelling of cats. It sounds crazy, but.
It sounds very
Nothing
interesting.
crazy.
I think because he was a bookworm publisher, that he must have been a Herman Melville fan, no doubt, and he had that in his mind.
Well, I remember being at St. Augustine with John Fraser, and I remember.
Or just call it.
No, it's fantastic. What are you talking about? There's no silly questions, and there's no bad solution,
Yeah.
and that's fantastic. So, like, I remember being at St. Augustine, and we saw a cast, and it was spelled out in some, something on the wall, and we all stopped and said, "What is a cast? Like, what the hell is a cast? Like, it's not even really a word." And I remember as we stood there, and Brian said, he must have been standing here and saw this word cast, because it's now become totally synonymous with this treasure hunt, and that it's a treasure, but it didn't exist in that form.
That's the only other place in America where the word cask is used for container.
That we found.
Right. That's fascinating. But so then you go, okay, he must have been right here and seen this placard and said, cask has a really cool sound to it, because now it's part of the treasure hunting vernacular, right? Before that, no one ever used it for that purpose. So that's fascinating.
But Family Secret's really too. So
Yes.
That's been part of the motivation, but also
Sure.
Herman Melville.
We had a question in the back.
Sure, love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yes, was he interested in all military history, U.S. military history, or just the Civil War, Revolution?
I really don't know. I don't know. I really don't.
So if there's no other questions, I'm going to ask Ben one last question. So last chance. Okay.
George, I have one.
Yes.
So then in 1984, would you have taken on this project again?
In 19,
84.
If
Right.
Right,
Hey,
when
would
you
you
were
have
done.
taken on it now?
Nope. Well, when you were done with the project, we submitted all the photos. If Byron was like, hey, let's do it again, would you have done it again?
anything that Byron asked me to do, I would do.
And how about,
That was legal. But he would never ask me to do anything illegal because he was such an ethical person. I cannot begin to tell you.
and
Okay?
then how about today, knowing all these people have come to honor this book and to speak with you? Does it motivate you to get out there and do anything else like like this, or to get more involved with the community?
I'm very involved with nonprofits, so yeah, I probably would. I would probably do more.
All right, Ben. Since this book came out, everything that you've seen about it, would you still be involved in it? What do you think about it? From 1982 to today.
I got to tell you, I cannot believe we're all here today about this book. It's just it's mind-boggling to me.
It has its own power.
I think it's great, and you know what? In retrospect, I could see it becoming a cult because Byron was one of the very first people to do CD-ROMs. Remember the term CD-ROM?
Yeah.
Byron did books for kids in CD-ROMs when nobody was doing it. Before there was the iPhone, before there was the Kindle. He was the first one to do online books on CDs. When there were no DVD. He was a visionary. He was way ahead of his time. He was always thinking about stuff like this. And, you know, he just was an innovator.
You know what? I'm sure everybody here can say that Byron was pure inspiration.
He was.
Everything about him and his ideas. We're all here sitting right here now because of his ideas today.
You know,
And I'll take it one step further. I talking to his daughters, who I know were interested in New York and looking because it would be another way to reconnect with their dad, and talking to I took people from all over the place, and that I never should have met or never would have talked to, right? Great people. And I challenge everybody here and anybody watching, right? Don't stop till all 12 are discovered. Because every time one is discovered, you get to relive his legacy. And it's so worthy because I think anything that has a cult following, how cool is that, right?
Yeah.
You're part of something really neat. And it has so many worthwhile qualities to it, so many layers to it. So the next one somebody once said to me, "Oh, do you feel bad that somebody found Boston because now you're not the last?" I said, "Oh, hell no!"
Say if the next cast is full off around, do you think that Josh Gates would want to do another show, or is it just
I
because
still
of
don't think he would.
That's up to Josh.
I don't know. I think he's totally fascinated with it, so I'm not sure that he wouldn't. Again, like I said, he said it all wrapped up very neatly and nicely. I joked with him because he said it was a sort of a perfect trilogy. And you mentioned Lord of the Rings, like it's a perfect trilogy. And I said, yeah, it's kind of like your Godfather, only your part 3 was better than theirs. So I think that I don't think he's ruling anything out. And I think if there's
what
a
if
really
somebody wants to find New York, in the next 2 months?
I think
there'll be another show.
my God, there's such an interest in this that I think he would absolutely embrace.
And then New York is Byron's backyard, his hometown.
Yeah, we said this morning, I think it's his swan song. I mean, maybe some people would have said, oh, it's probably the first that he, you don't even know the order that he did them in,
No,
obviously.
not at all.
But I think, this is where he was from. This was, I think, I think this is probably, and we're all just speculating, but I think when people talk about how complicated it is and how many potential areas, I think this is the one
This
that
is the combination of.
yes, I think so. I think so.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I agree. I gotta say, when Ben said anything that Byron would ask me to do, I would do, that really hit me in the heart, in the feels, because that just tells you about the friendship. And I think I immediately thought of myself and George.
Right.
And if George picked up the phone and needed me to do something, I would be right there, and there'd be no questions asked.
If you could fix my bathroom, that would be
Hey, hey, you started on the bathroom without my permission, so.
Byron was the first person ever to do celebrity books for children. He did Joni Mitchell, Both Sides Now. He did Paul Simon at the Zoo. He did a whole book about At the Zoo, written by Paul Simon. Byron packaged that book.
Wow.
I mean, he
The
did.
one thing I love
And the Jerry,
about
excuse me, the Jerry Seinfeld book. He did Jerry Seinfeld called The Halloween. Jerry Seinfeld is 7 years old, living in Massapequa, Long Island, going trick-or-treating. But it was cold out, so he was wearing a Superman costume, but Jerry's mother made him wear a coat over the Superman costume. And Byron got Hershey's chocolate to put money into the book, so Hershey's chocolate is all over the book. He was the first one to do it. I did a book with Billy Crystal, Billy Crystal's book to his 4-month-old granddaughter. Byron did that. He packaged that. He convinced Billy Crystal to do that book. I shot some pictures of Billy Crystal, and then he did another book with Billy Crystal.
Wow.
So Byron was way ahead of his time. He really was.
Wow.
Yeah.
So one
And
thing
not to
that
mention
I love
Byron-
about Byron is like when you found out that the people that made like Superman like didn't make a lot of money about it, and Byron like went.
That was Byron's dad. Yeah.
Byron's dad.
That right there, like, that was huge. Like Byron went and said, you know what, these are my childhood heroes, and I want to see them make money.
Right. Right.
And not only that video you're talking about, but also like video games, like Dragon World. He made the video game. Well, it's a video game, but it's a text-based adventure game. That's what I consider a video game because that's what I played when I was a child. It's a text-based game based on one of his books that Byron and John Pride worked on. Just yeah, it's amazing the extent that he went to bring literature to youth.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But even as adults, and I hate to be so kumbaya and like, right, because it sounds silly repeating myself, but what you just said is so important, right? When you hear this, Ben would have done anything for Byron, right? You would do anything for George. But for this project, you two don't even know each other.
Absolutely.
Never would have met, right?
As for Bradley's wife, I'm going to interject that I call George my sister wife. And if Brad is not engaged in what I'm doing, I understand that he's engaged with the community and with what George has going on and with what you gentlemen have going on. And I will say that I am very honored to share my spouse with this community. But I will ask my husband, are you speaking with my sister wife? Tell him I love him and hello.
And so that's all part of the legacy, right? Whether you dig up a treasure or
One thing
not.
that's awesome is we're all sitting here right now because of Byron Preiss.
Yeah.
And that in itself is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to steal the last question. Ben, a lot of cool things have happened because of this book. A lot of people have met a lot of nice people. I've met some of my best friends. Anytime I think of my friends, I tend to think of one specific memory or something like that. I'm wondering, when you think of Byron, what's your favorite memory? What's unrelated to this? What makes you smile when you think of Byron?
There are a lot of things, but I think I brought it up before. Whenever he come over to my apartment with his, he'd always have books, comic books for my kids. He would sit down with my kids, talk about the comic books, talk about the books he was working on. He also wanted to get feedback from my kids because my kids were young and he was doing a lot of kids' books. But that's what I remember most about Byron. We'd be walking up Madison Avenue to go to Jackson Hole for a hamburger, which is one of his favorite hamburger places and one of my favorite hamburger places. And he'd be talking to Ivan and Harrison and Kara and Blair. I mean, that's what I remember the most about Byron, is not getting together with him alone, with just me, but with my kids. He was, if he wasn't a book publisher, he probably wouldn't have been a school teacher. Probably.
Wasn't he a school teacher?
He, for a very, very short time. When Byron was at University of Pennsylvania, he took on a project with Rick Steranko and to write comics about anti-drugs.
Yeah, they published one.
Published one. And Byron was extremely anti-drug. Anti-everything, anti-marijuana. He just was not anti-drugs at all. And he felt that this is the way to teach kids about anti-drugs, was through comic books. He was so ahead of his time.
Can I ask one more question? Of course. I have a question. Sure. What do you think his reaction, had he not passed, right? Had he been here to this day, how do you think he would have responded to what's going on and all the people? Like, would this have been a great blessing or a great curse with too many people contacting and emailing?
No.
He
Byron wouldn't have embraced this. He would have absolutely embraced it. There's no question in my mind. He would really have fed off this whole day. Look, he was a book packager. He was really a book packager. So a book packager, what they do is they get the artists, the illustrators, the writers together, and then he sells it to a book publisher. Byron didn't really publish a lot of his own books, even though it said Byron Preiss Visual Publications. If you notice, it was either Bantam or Simon & Schuster. So he would have embraced this. Yeah, he would have been very, very excited about this. I know he would have. I know he would have.
Well, matzo ball or Ben, and you'll understand why I call him that if you go to his website. Andy, thank you so much for taking time out of your lives to come and visit with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's great. Absolutely great. Thank you all for coming.